Hi, welcome to Naptime Nutrition. I'm Yaffi Lvova, registered dietitian and owner of Naptime Nutrition, Baby Bloom Nutrition, and Toddler Test Kitchen. And I'm very excited today to have Bayla Abdurachmanov with us to talk about who am I now? A lot of times we get lost in parenthood, and this is Bayla's area of focus. She deals entirely with identity with mothers. And so this is going to be fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me, Bayla.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're going to have fun, more fun than losing your identity when first having children anyway. I think a lot of people can relate to that, like you spend so much time. And I know with me, I had infertility issues. So not only did I spend that time thinking about being a mom and thinking about what it would be like, but 4 years of it's not happening just really kind of blows that image up in your head. And I know that women who experience infertility are at higher risk for issues like postpartum depression and anxiety, partially because of that buildup. And it's really painful to lose yourself in family and to just lose yourself at all. So you help with that.
Yeah, 100%. It's that is really what I do, right? That is me as an identity coach for moms is I walk moms through the process of matrescence. So, what matrescence is it's similar to adolescence in that in adolescence a child becomes an adult, and there's all these years in between, the teenage years, the adolescent years, where they are, they're coming into themselves, and they are discovering and creating a new sense of identity and identity as an adult. Well, we now know that with mothers, and actually with every pregnancy, not just your first, there is something called matrescence, and it is your process of becoming a mother. And there are biological changes that take place. There are changes that take place in the brain. And the reason that you feel so different is because you actually are different. Your brain has changed. There's so much that has changed. So this is my big topic. And, you can stop me and ask me questions because I could go on and on about it. But, this is what matrescence is. And this is what I walk the women through is what's going on with them. Who do they want to be? Not losing themselves, creating that sense of self, and also addressing something that I call the identity gap, which is that time period where that who am I question comes up. Am I just a mom? Am I more than a mom? What am I supposed to be doing? Who am I supposed to be? All of those confusing questions.
Yeah. And that it really does come up a lot because every aspect of your personality, every aspect of your life changes when you have kids, whether that came biologically or otherwise. And I thought it was interesting also that in a group where we met, you mentioned that a step parent's brain changes in a similar way to a biological parent who has a child, and it just happens in a different way. So I think it's great to recognize that, not all of our audience is going to have become parents through biological means. So if you could say something about that would be great.
That is super important. So whether you are an adoptive parent, you have stepchildren, however you have, however you've become a mother, whether it's biologically or not, there have been studies that show that the same changes actually take place in the brain. So if you look at an adoptive mother's brain and a biological mother's brain, they'll have very similar changes. The only difference is the length of time. So for an adoptive mother, the changes won't happen as fast. It will take a little bit longer than for a biological mother, but the changes will happen and your brain will reflect that. So it's just being the mother, right? Just being the mother to this child does have the same weight and impact whether you're a biological mother or an adoptive mother.
It's so fascinating. It's amazing how we have adapted to change, to adapt to motherhood. So why do you think that we lose ourselves the way that we do?
So I think that one of the biggest factors is that people don't talk about matrescence enough and they don't know what it is. And so we're kind of expected, like, okay, 6 weeks you return to work and you're expected to all of a sudden have everything together, really know what you're doing and have it all figured out. And even if you've had a child before and you're adding on to the family, there's a lot of matrescence happens again. There's all those changes take place. And by the way, these changes that take place, it's not just like a year postpartum. It actually is a minimum of 2 years, and maximum, they say your entire life, your brain can actually be changing. So based on matrescence. So there's just so much happening, and we don't know, as a society, we don't talk enough about matrescence. We don't know enough about this. And any woman, I feel like, who feels a little bit off or a little bit different, they might say, okay, you have postpartum depression. But and there are, women that do have postpartum depression that do, need therapy for that and help for that. But then there are women who don't have postpartum depression. They don't feel like, I'm not depressed, I'm happy, but something is just off, and it is matrescence, and we just don't talk about it enough. So women, we go through this period of an identity gap where we had our baby and now we try and get back to, like, oh, let me get back to my body the way that it was, my life the way that it was. I'm just going to add the baby in, right? Like, oh, my time will be the same, everything will be the same, I'm just adding the baby in. And then we have our baby and we're like, wait a second, no.
Yeah.
Right? And it's kind of what's expected. And also, we kind of don't, like I said, we don't know about matrescence. We don't know that we're really changing and we're feeling different because we are different. And so we're kind of trying to fit ourselves back into our old identity. And it doesn't work because we're not who we were before.
Yeah. A colleague of mine wrote a piece a while ago on help me get my prepubescent body back. And it was kind of a joke headline. And it was trying to point out that you're not prepubescent anymore, so you don't need the prepubescent body. And you're not a mother anymore, so you don't need your pre-baby body. That's something that we're moving past. But I did a whole segment on just body image and motherhood, and the idea that everything changes around us. Our name changes. All of a sudden, you're mommy, or whatever language your children are referring to. And your time changes. You're not sleeping the same. Your activities are different. The way you relate to the world is different. We have this entire comprehensive identity shift. So we try to focus on the one thing that we feel like we have control over, which is our body. And the truth is that puts an extreme amount of stress on motherhood when we're focusing so much on that, because it's working against us. You're trying to lose weight right after the baby. Well, the thing is that 20% of women don't lose weight with breastfeeding. It's very complex hormonally and otherwise. But that stress on getting your body back and trying to fit yourself into that pre-baby identity can really work against you as far as, overall sanity and overall identity goes. It's I would think it's probably helpful to lean into this stuff rather than fighting it, particularly at the beginning.
Yeah, of course. And I just want to touch on what you mentioned about how we actually view the world differently. So our perspective on the world changes, and our perspective on ourselves, our own identity changes, and our relationships change. And so basically what happens, and you may know about this because, you do work, like, let's say, with the body and with hormones, right? So you have all of these different hormonal changes, but also a woman who's given birth, she has many more oxytocin receptors in her brain. Like her oxytocin, which is the hormone of love and intimacy and connection, right? She has so much more than, let's say, a woman who hasn't given birth or who hasn't had a child, or a man, right? And so she literally goes from me to we. She actually starts thinking in terms of we rather than me. And that also, you need to give yourself time, like, for that adjustment, and to realize, like, wait a second, I'm actually thinking differently. I'm actually feeling differently. And you start to, like you said, you actually see the world differently, because now you're thinking in terms of we, you're thinking in terms of the long term. What kind of world am I going to leave to my children? So you start to really, really shift your thoughts. And I think women are major change makers because of that. Like, one of the main reasons is because they have this superpower. It's really a strength. We don't recognize it yet as such, but we should. It really is a strength and a superpower of going from me to we. And so realizing, first of all, that you have changed, accepting and embracing that you've changed, really can cause an expansion of self rather than a contraction of self where you're trying to fit yourself back into who you were, how you looked, how you did things. Let's expand the self, right? And you can create a new vision that aligns with your new feelings. Like a lot of women will find that they like certain things that they never liked before, or maybe they dislike certain things that they did like before, right? Like with all my, I was always very creative, but with each pregnancy, I dabbled in like a different creative art that I was never really interested in before. And so you'll start to notice these little things, but you are changing. And so just embracing that, being prepared for that, being ready to recognize that also it doesn't happen like this. It's a process. Just like we don't expect a child overnight to now be an adult and they get the whole teenage years, we need to give women, we need to give moms time, and especially moms that have a lot of babies, back to back and close in age, right? And so they're constantly, they're in this like cycle, right? And they're on this fast track. And so giving us ourselves time to recognize like, okay, here's what's going to happen. Here are the changes that are going to take place. I am going to feel differently. I may like different things, or, all of that, giving ourselves the space and the time for that.
I think that's really valuable. That's really amazing. I love that expansion versus contraction, because it's so appropriate in the literal way and the figurative way. I mean, that's really a useful metaphor. So when we're talking about women who are planning to become pregnant or maybe are pregnant now, what can they do to set themselves up for success as far as that identity gap on the other side?
That's a great question. So I think, first of all, if they're here and they're listening, this is step one. Just being aware of the process is so helpful to understand that this is what I'm going to go through, right? And it starts in pregnancy. Your hormones change, and all of these changes start to take place, right? So to understand that is really important, to be educated on what matrescence is and what you're going to go through. And also to understand that if you're not pregnant yet, you don't know how it's going to be for you. So my experience is going to be different than your experience and different than another woman's experience, but we're all going to have that similar, that matrescence where we're going to change. We're going to have a changing sense of identity. We're going to have a different way of relating in our relationships. We're going to have a different way of seeing the world. And so giving yourself the space and the understanding that this is what I'm going to go through. And I would say probably the most important thing would be to learn how to forgive yourself and love yourself unconditionally. Because as a mother, as a human being, we're going to make mistakes, right? As a mother, we're going to make mistakes. And being able to forgive yourself and love yourself unconditionally is going to be like your number one tool in your toolbox, because we're human. We make mistakes, and we have to, living with, a lot of times mom will do the mom guilt, right? And having that is going to be really, really, really difficult to try and get through this transition. So I would say that's like the number one thing, is really practice forgiving yourself and accepting, acknowledging, like, I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get there.
It's really hard to do that. And honestly, that resonated so much. I felt my throat kind of constrict, because I just remember when my twins were little, all the mistakes that I made and how hard I was on myself. And the truth is that our kids are going to thrive. I mean, especially if you're here listening to this, it obviously means that you care a great deal about your parenting. And we're going to make mistakes. And the truth is that our kids are going to thrive because of both of our mistakes and the things we do right. It's the combination. If we were perfect parents, they probably wouldn't benefit as much as if we show that it's okay to have flaws and it's okay to mess up sometimes. And you know what? It's okay to apologize too, both to yourself and to your kids. Like, oh, I'm sorry, we're on this long road trip and I took a wrong turn and now it's going to be another half hour. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's really valuable to model that kind of behavior, but we do have to start with us, and we're the ones we often forget about. And that's 100%. Why it's important to have this conversation. We forget about ourselves.
Yes. So 100%. That's something I do with my kids as well. Is like, I'm sorry, mommy made a mistake, and they know. And also, you think about it, if you can practice that with yourself now, so that when your child is able to comprehend and sees that, oh, okay, mommy makes mistakes and it's okay, and she apologizes and she moves on, you're giving your child such an amazing gift, right? To be able to grow up and to forgive themselves and to love themselves no matter what, and just to move on, right? So I think that is just incredible, is being able to practice that, have that, and give it over to your children, right?
Yeah. And it's much easier than it sounds. Like, some things are harder than they sound. Forgiving yourself when you have kids and when you mess up with your kids, that can be pretty difficult. But just the idea of removing the guilt from a lot of your decisions, sometimes you can just say, this is a decision I'm making. I'm not going to feel guilty about it.
Right.
And start with that. And, of course, coming from a dietitian, start with food. Eat something and enjoy it and refuse to feel guilty about it. And that's a good place to start.
Have your
That's
own
always a good
back.
thing
That's
to
what I
do.
like to tell my clients. Have your own back.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So how do you get yourself back when you realize that you're languishing in this pit of despair and your matrescence was not all that graceful, or isn't all that graceful? What can you do to get yourself back?
So I have a whole program that I walk my clients through, and I'll tell you my 3 main steps that I take them through. And the first step is saying bye-bye to mommy guilt, which we just talked a little bit about. But I think that's like, sort of like clearing the space for you to then get to the next step, which is creating your life, like actively creating your vision, your sense of identity, and who you want to be now, how you want to show up in the world as a mom, as a woman, right? And literally who I want to be, how I want to show up. And then the last step is embracing the challenges. So obviously, I get into more detail, right? When I'm with my clients, I walk through different detailed processes, but I could give you just a little glimpse, right, of what I do. So let's say bye-bye to mommy guilt. One of the most important things that I do with my clients is I take them through something called the Motherhood Manual. And what that is it's like when you get a new gadget, right? Like, let's say my microphone, it came with this manual and it tells me what I should and what I shouldn't do with it. Well, we all have a manual, an unconscious or subconscious manual for ourselves of how we should be as a mom, how we shouldn't be as a mom, and just being aware of that, going through and saying, okay, here's what I think I should do, what I shouldn't do. A lot of that is made up of our past experiences, maybe our things that our parents did that we want to replicate or that we don't want to replicate. It's made up of sort of like our culture, society, our communities that we're in, what we think will be expected of us, how we think we'll look. And so what you want to do is you want to get really clear on what your motherhood manual is. And you want to just write it down, all of those things. And then you can actually go through and consciously say, do I really want this? Is this something that I want to keep? Or is this something that I want to do away with or change? And then you have more control. It's not there floating around in your subconscious and making you feel like, oh, a big thing is I shouldn't send my kid to daycare. I shouldn't do that. Well, why shouldn't I? Why should I? Start to question it, right? So you get that motherhood manual down, and that's really one of the major steps in getting rid of the mommy guilt. And then after you do that, another thing is with you really creating your vision. So now you've kind of cleared that field and you start to recognize when it's like your motherhood manual coming up or your inner critic coming up. And then you could be like, I got you. That's not what I really want. That's just part of my manual, right? And then when you're creating your vision, you kind of look at, who do I want to be in 5 years from now? Not necessarily actions. Like, a lot of time we focus on like what we want to be doing, but more like, what do I want my energy to be like? When I walk into a room, what kind of energy do I want to give off? Who do I want to be? How do I want to be with my children or as a woman? And just kind of creating that picture, like getting really sensory. Like, where am I in 5 years from now? What am I wearing? How do I look? What am I doing? Who am I being? What do my actions say about me as a person? And having that in your mind, that like future vision of who I want to be and how I want to show up. And then, of course, the last part is embracing the challenges, because guess what? If you're living and breathing, you're going to have challenges.
Ain't that the
So,
truth?
right. If you're living and breathing, it doesn't matter what you're doing or who you are, you're going to have those challenges. So that part is really about the acceptance, keeping in mind your future vision, keeping in mind who you want to be in the present moment when things start to get crazy, kind of like ground yourself and, am I being who I want to be? And accepting the challenges that come, accepting who you are now, accepting that you're in this process. So maybe this is your vision for who you want to be, but right now you're getting there. So it's part of the process. And that's where also the forgiveness comes in. And not making yourself wrong. So many times we make ourselves wrong for so many things. And here we are in this, you could say it's a difficult process, right? This process of matrescence, this really period where we're trying to define ourselves and to navigate and to figure things out. So I know that's a lot, and I kind of like shoved 12 weeks into just a little clip of it, right? But that's kind of the three main steps, is trying to get rid of the mommy guilt, create a vision, and then embrace the challenges when they show up.
Wow, I think that's really helpful. And the truth is those points resonate at so many different levels. Like you can do the same thing with your career. You can do the same thing with your marriage. And I love that you're not focusing on the doing, because we have a very productivity focused society right now. And a lot of times you can get to the end of the day and think, oh, today was a waste. I didn't do anything. But the truth is that that's not the only way to live your life. And it's not the only way to judge your worth. And actually the past two segments of Naptime Nutrition were about how you're worth more than your productivity and why you deserve a break, even if you haven't, quote unquote, accomplished anything. So I'm really, like hitting a stride with this motherhood identity and how to relax into it. And a lot of times I do these segments based on what I personally need. But this was a huge struggle that I had. It was a really big one. And I think that a lot of people do have this. So why is it important to take care of yourself? I mean, when we become mothers, why do our needs matter? Isn't it just the needs of our kids and our family?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And just like going back a tiny bit about the whole idea of like the doing versus the being. So I'll tell you that I consider myself very high achieving before I had children and I was single, and a very high achieving person, very goal oriented, very doing oriented, right? And when you become a mom and all of these changes take place, there is a power, there's part of the matrescence and part of the feminine energy is allowing yourself to kind of be in this flow where, think you can change up your schedule, things can happen, and just kind of being present. Whereas the doing energy and the masculine energy is more of like, no matter what, going for the goal, like everything else, you out of the way and you just focus. And there's not as much flow, maneuvering, able to, do all of that. That is the feminine energy and the beauty of matrescence and being in the present moment. So and I'm sure many women, probably you as well, women who consider themselves high achieving and very goal oriented, it was a big shock to me when all of a sudden I was like, I just don't care as much about that thing anymore. There's something else I want more. And it was like, what's wrong with me? That was the question, like, what's going on with me? Because, a lot of us start where we're trying to answer questions for ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, what is going on with me? And I'm telling my husband, I said, my husband was very supportive. And I'm like, you're very supportive. I love my job. I'm happy. I'm head over heels in love with our baby. When I had my first, and I'm telling him this, and I'm like, but something is off. I just don't know what's going on with me. And so it was all of this was all of the matrescence, but it was also the changing, priorities changed. And I was like shocked because there was that my goals and everything was number one priority. And it was shocking to me that I'm changing this and that I feel differently about it. So being aware of that's, at the end of the day, what did we do? It's not so much about what we did. It's about who you're being in the world. And that's something else I do with my clients is I walk them through creating a mission statement. And the mission is about who they want to be in the world and how to tap into it at every moment. Even when your kids are having a temper tantrum on the floor, how do I tap into my mission of who I want to be? So yes, very much about embracing the feminine, tapping into who you want to be, and allowing that feminine energy, that ability to flow, the ability to maneuver, the ability to reprioritize things, to show up. So I actually did I answer your question? Because I think I went on a tangent with the feminine and masculine energy.
That was a beautiful tangent. No, it was just about why it's important to take care of ourselves. So I think you were starting with how our priorities shift. And then,
Yes.
but we have to still be a priority to ourselves. And I think sometimes the priorities can shift a little bit too much, or we lean into them a little bit too much, and we sometimes forget about ourselves, and we forget about taking care of ourselves in the greater context of life.
Right. Very common, because we're trying to adapt. And some of us have very supportive families and communities. Some of us don't. But we're trying to adapt, and some of us are really doing it mostly on our own, maybe with the help of our partner. And so there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of weight. A lot of us are also working as well. But I call this filling up your cup. So it's beyond self-care. I look at self-care, minimal self-care, meaning like taking a bath in the evening or reading a book. Those are important. They're things I like to do as well. But I look at filling up, I look at that, at self-care. It's kind of like a Band-Aid on the boo-boo, right? It's like kind of like just taking care of the symptom, but not getting to the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is the identity gap, is the changing identity, is trying to force yourself back into your life and just like, oh, let's add in the baby here and the toddler here and, figure it out, rather than the expansion of self. And when I talk about filling up your cup, I talk about doing things that get you into a state of flow. And state of flow is when you lose track of time. So I also talk a lot about time and our relationship with time, because the number one thing I hear from moms is being overwhelmed, right? So when you're in a state of flow, it's literally an hour could pass by. My husband says about me, when I'm in my flow state, is usually when I'm doing something creative or when I'm coaching. And he said, literally, I cannot get your attention for anything. It's like you're totally blocked out to the world. That's what it is. It's like you're literally just there in the moment with what you're doing, and you have no sense of time about it, right? So that is so fulfilling and so important. And a lot of times as moms, we don't, maybe some of us used to be artistic, and that's what got us into a sense of flow, and we don't do that anymore. But it's really important to follow those inclinations and to do those things. And it doesn't have to be, I think a lot of times moms make the mistake and think like, then it has to be, I have to commit so much time to it. It has to be something full time. I don't have time for it. But it could literally be 1 hour a week. I used to go to a painting class for 1 hour a week, and I just look forward so much to that 1 hour. That was my state of flow. From the beginning to the end of the class, it could have been 10 hours, it could have been 10 minutes. I had no idea, right? So it's literally could be a little bit of time that you're filling up your cup. The more you fill up your cup, the more you can give to your children. Your children have a happier mother, a mother who's more patient, a mother who is able to control her emotions better because she's fulfilled.
Right. I think that the big mistake that I made, especially, I think that the infertility compounded it, but it was the idea that motherhood should be fulfilling in and of itself. And for some people, maybe that's true. It certainly wasn't true for me, though. And I think it's not true for a lot of people. I think a lot of people need something else that's not just being a mother. And not to minimize, I heard that as it was coming out, not to minimize being a mother, but sometimes that's fulfilling for some people and not for others. So it's important to look at the reality of the situation and what the reality is for you, because trying to force fulfillment is not going to end up being very fulfilling.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're so right. I think this is a big part of a lot of our motherhood manuals, is that I should only enjoy being a mother. But what if I'm very fulfilled when I'm with my children, and I'm also very fulfilled when I'm creating art or writing or, whatever it is that you love to do? So it doesn't have to be either or. It could be both. It could be many things. It could be more than two things that you get immense fulfillment from. And if you have, like I said, if you have an inclination or desire to get fulfillment from something that you want to fill your cup up with, don't only say, I can only get it from this one source, only from my children. Check your motherhood manual, because I bet it's on there. Like, the only way I should feel good is when I'm with my children, right? Like, check that out on your motherhood manual.
Yeah. That was a big one. Like, I have these babies. Why am I not completely over the moon at this point? And also, when you were talking about processes versus doing, it occurred to me actually this morning on my way to my therapist that my trigger points that I identified in my house are the dishes, the laundry, and my journal. And I realize that those are not things that you do. Those are things that you keep doing. So if I look at the laundry as something that I need to check off the list, it's never going to be checked off the list, because when everything is clean and everything is hung, there are still the clothes that are currently on our bodies. So it's never like, and that drove me insane. The one time I actually got all three things done at the same time, I had all this anxiety about like, oh my God, we're going to have lunch and use dishes. Oh no, the clothes that are on our bodies and I have to wash them. And the thing is that seeing those as items was stress inducing, but seeing them as processes is a lot easier to swallow, you know?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that. I mean, if you think about your thoughts, if your thoughts are like, I need to get this done, and like you're
Right.
saying, the idea that it's going to be done when it's never actually going to be finished, there is no end point, right? So I love that idea of focusing on the process, with the dishes, with the laundry, and yeah, checking your mind and saying, what am I thinking about this? Am I thinking I have to get it done? Because that thought is creating a lot of pressure. And
Uh-huh.
then obviously that leads to results that I don't like, probably either ignoring it or, something of that nature, right? We all have different actions we take from our thoughts, but looking at it as a process. And what I will mention that I also, shortly after I had my first child, I hired an organizer. Speaking of laundry and dishes, I hired an organizer to help me organize my home. And I still, to this day, consider it in one of my top 5 purchases with the purchase of my home, literally, is having that organization, that routine, and also the routine, the whole idea of the process, because it's just part of the routine,
Right. Yeah, cleaning the house. The house is never going to be clean. It's always a process. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of a gentler way to look at the responsibilities that I don't necessarily want to have.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I like to advise women when they're pregnant or when they just had a baby to make a physical list of things that they like or things that have filled their cup up, so that they have a physical reference point. You made a great point that sometimes these things change, and so I think that's something that I'll add to that piece of advice. I do think it's helpful to have a tangible list, so that when you're having those moments of overwhelm, you can look at it and be like, oh, right, I really like those exercise videos on YouTube. And that gives me a lot of smiles and energy. Uh,
Yeah.
so, so that's my major tip. What do you like to say to start people off?
That's great. I love that you have them make a physical list. And I would just add, like, you can cross off things off the list at any time. You can add things at any time. You can change things at any time, so that we're not stuck. We're not like, a lot of times we get like stuck, like it has to be perfect. It has to be, right. I used to like that. Why don't I like that anymore? And then it becomes a big deal. But yeah, just looking at it as like a living document, right, that you can constantly be changing and adding to. But I love that idea of having that reference point. So
Yeah.
for me, one of the major tools that I teach my clients, it's called the model. And I learned it from my master coach. So it's basically a way to see, like, when you're taking, I tell them to take their sort of their, I call it your emotional temperature, right? If you feel like you're a little frustrated, you're a little off, you're not sure, try and tune in and feel like, what's going on in my body? What am I feeling? Am I feeling upset, frustrated, mad? What is it? And so I would have them put it into what I call a model. And what the model is it shows you your thoughts and how you're getting the results that you're getting in your life right now. So if, for example, I am frustrated, right? I would put that in, it's the F line, right? So I have a C line, which is the circumstance. I have a T line, which is your thought. I have an F line, which is your feeling. I have an A line, which is the actions that you take or don't take. And the R line is my result. So for example, let's say laundry is the circumstance and the feeling is I'm feeling frustrated. What am I thinking about the laundry that's making me feel frustrated? Well, maybe I'm thinking I have to get it done. When I'm thinking I have to get it done, I feel frustrated. And when I feel frustrated, well, what I do is I actually procrastinate and I don't do the laundry. And the result is that I never get the laundry done. So
Yeah.
being able to actually like see it on paper, do a thought download. It's called a thought download, where you just write out your thoughts quickly, like what's going on in your mind, and then plug it into a model and see like where this feeling is coming from, what thoughts are creating it. And then you're able to do an intentional model if you want. Like, what do I actually want to think about the laundry? How do I want to feel about it? And that will show you what actions you should take to get the result that you actually want.
Wow, I love that. That's really practical and useful immediately. That's great.
Yeah, you can use it in any area of your life, right? Anything.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned the word coach a couple of times, and I saw I'm very careful on my broadcast about credentials and staying in your lane. And so I read something that you wrote on Facebook about what exactly a coach is and how it differs from a therapist, and how you make sure to stay in your lane. So can you talk a little bit about what a coach is and all that? I know I threw that at you.
Yeah, for sure. No problem. So especially working with moms, and you have things like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. So any mom that, for example, would want to come work with me if she has postpartum depression, I would just make sure that she is getting treated for that by a therapist, because I'm not a therapist. So a therapist is a licensed practitioner, licensed under the state board, and they can treat, they can treat trauma, they can treat all kinds of mental, I guess what they would call them now is like, any difficulties you're having, like depression and anxiety and trauma, anything like that. A coach, what I think our focus is we're not, we're not making diagnoses. We're not diagnosing anyone. So you don't come to me and I don't say, hey, you have postpartum depression. I don't do that. A therapist will make a diagnosis. So I do not make a diagnosis. And what my main focus is really helping you now and in the future, creating your future vision, helping you with your present. It's a great supplement to therapy for a lot of people, but it's not in place of therapy. It's not like, even, for example, like medication, coaches don't do that, and therapists don't either. I know psychiatrists do, therapists don't. But we're not diagnosing. We're not really looking at what's wrong. We're looking at where do you want to be and where are you now? And so I feel like coaching is more future focused in many ways and present focused. A lot of therapy, there's a lot of different therapies, so I can't say across the board, but a lot of therapy is more, there is some past work that they do, and also, of course, any diagnosis, anything that needs to be dealt with on that level. So coaching is really about, for me, and as an identity coach, it's about your sense of self, developing your sense of self, going through all of those questions and all of those issues, like who am I now? How do I handle all of this? And looking towards the future focus.
I love that. Yeah, there are different ways to approach any issue. And especially as a dietitian, I see the nutrition focus. And especially with this postpartum period, there's a lot that goes into it nutritionally. And I do have a handout on how to improve mood by use of nutrition. But it's also very clear that that is not the only piece. That if you have depression or anxiety that's related to poor hydration or low vitamin D, you're going to get benefit out of therapy or out of coaching, but not as much as if your vitamin D level was adequate and your hydration level was adequate. A lot of times people who are encountering different obstacles in life, they're multifactorial. And we live in a world that no longer likes nuance, and we want one professional to fix all the stuff. And so it's good to have these talks about what our different roles are as professionals and how we can each work together to help the client. And so that's just, I like to talk about that. I like to talk about the collaborative nature that can be part of this conversation and really should be. Yeah,
I agree. It doesn't have to be either or. Like I said, a lot of times coaching supplements therapy very nicely. And like you said, nutrition, I did that. I had a, physical issue I was dealing with I had stomach issues, and I went the nutrition route. So I did, I went to a functional nutritionist and I did that. I obviously went to my doctor. I did a lot of coaching on it from the emotional aspect. So I did that as well. So like, I also, I try to attack it from every area. Right. And so, we could really collaborate and do it together. Right. It doesn't have to be either or.
Right. And especially during the time of matrescence, you're dealing with physical issues after the pregnancy. It's very common to have thyroid complications and to have various nutritional deficiencies just because of the depletion related to the pregnancy, particularly if you have, as you mentioned, back-to-back pregnancies, kids close together, then you tend to build on those nutritional deficiencies. And that can really affect your worldview and how you wake up in the morning and how how you feel and how you see yourself. So it's good to look at all of the angles and to identify what's most helpful for you and to go for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I think that's part of filling up your cup as well, is just making
Yeah.
sure you're being taken care of and you're taking care of yourself, from all the different angles. Like let's say the nutrition, the emotional aspect, all of that.
Yeah, definitely. So Bayla, where do people find you if they want to work with you?
If you want to work with me, you can find me at Coach Bayla, that's BAYLA.com. That is my website. And there you will find out how you can work together.
Amazing. Well, I think this was a really important conversation. I was so tickled to have run into you in that Facebook group because I was just thinking, I need her. I need her on my broadcast. This is like everyone needs to know that this is something that's available and that everyone is going through these identity shifts. And so many people are having difficult obstacles with those identity shifts, but there is help. There is a way out. There is evidence-based information, and you can pull yourself up out of that and appreciate yourself and appreciate your life circumstance so much better when you have that grounding.
100%. And my request would be, if you are listening to this, that you talk about matrescence. You talk about it with your friends, and we make it more accessible in the world, that more moms, more women, and more people in general, the men should know about it as well, right? How to support us, so that all of us are making this knowledge available. Like, talk about what matrescence is, tell your friends about it, so they realize, like, I'm not the only one going through this, I'm not the only one with these questions, and there is a really good answer for why I have these questions.
Yeah. A friend of mine told me that real friends don't clean their houses for each other. And she meant it literally, like, because we should show each other what we're living like so that you know that it's normal. But that also applies to emotional. Like, don't clean your house for your friends. Share what's really going on
Yes.
because it'll help normalize it. And that's why I try to share stuff. I try to share all the time personally that I'm seeing a therapist. I'm on a couple of anti-anxieties. And I had infertility. Like, we need to talk about these things because so many people are doing this and so many people are uncomfortable with the choices they've had to make in life or the circumstances where they find themselves. And the more we can talk about how normal these things are, the more confident people will feel, both in their place where they are and also they'll feel more confident in seeking help when they need it.
Yes, 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 yes. We need to. I love that idea of not cleaning your house for your friend. And we need to make it known. Like, there are answers, there are real reasons, and we're all dealing with it, right? We're all dealing with it. We're all in it. And that's our power. Our power is sharing and helping each other out in that way.
Yeah, that's where we have our village.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bayla, for joining me. This was really wonderful.
This
And
was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
yeah, well, it's great to meet other people who are traveling in this postpartum world and helping out. I think it's so special. Yeah. So usually I'd say when the next nap time nutrition is, but ever since the beginning of 2020, I am way off schedule. So you'll just have to keep checking back.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thank you all, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thanks.